I'm an analyst. I was speaking with Josh yesterday, and I'd met Josh for the first time, Mr. Josh, and he said, "Are you an HR guy?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Are you a technologist?" I said, "No." He said, "What are you doing here?" Here's what I'm doing here. I'm an analyst. I sit in the middle between all of you people. I know just enough about technology to crash any system, from mainframes to Hadoop, and have done it. And I know just enough about HR to fool my HR VP that I'm following her process. So there is a gap. There is a gap out there, which SHRM is directly going after, which I was so excited to be invited to this conference because I'm very passionate about this topic. And that gap is in between two different cultures. And I'm not talking about the Western world versus India. I'm talking between HR and technology. You take an HR person, they go through university, spending their entire university career avoiding every math class. You take technology, they spend their entire university career avoiding every humanities class. And then we put them together and we expect them to solve for world peace, and it doesn't happen. So this is where I'm going to talk to you today, and I'm going to try to make it very concrete. My absolute agenda is to make you think differently about how you're presenting data. I can definitely go to the high end of analytics, but I wanted to start with something concrete because I want you to go home today and rethink how you're doing something. So I've set it up from that perspective. So specifically, I want to talk about dashboards. So dashboards, by the way, have two words in the name, dash and board. Dash means go quickly. It doesn't mean, can you call me up, set up an hour so I'd explain this crazy thing to you. Dash. So that's where I want to start. So what I did to start this conversation off, I mean, it's really fun being the data whisperer because all I have to do to figure out what I'm going to criticize or what I'm going to talk about is I just go to the internet. And so in this case, what I did was first I went to Bing and I said, best HR dashboards. So all of the things that came back were Microsoft. I said, no, this is not good enough. Other companies have bad stuff too. So I went to Google. And the ones I'm showing you were the top 3 that came up. So this one, I call this the Flying Donuts. You can actually get this at Krispy Kreme. It's a custom order, but you can get it. One of the interesting characteristics about this, you can see in the legend, there are 2 legends with the same colors that apply to I don't know what. Now, because it's a donut, and because we need to think about our sugar, down below is a glucose saliva strip. So after you've eaten all those donuts, you can measure your glucose. The second one I pulled, now this one feels very violent to me. I call this one the swords of Balubali. So you got swords going like this, swords going like this, swords going like this, and right at the end they come down. There's a concept in data visualization called pre-attentive confusion. And pre-attentive confusion means you have so many different shapes, so many different colors, that you've confused your reader before they've even looked at it. And this is an example of that. The last bad example I wanted to show, this is just a data dump. This is someone who's really excited about all the incredible data they have, and they throw it out and let you figure out what's going on here. And so you've got all different kinds of colors, all different kinds of lines, and if it's not enough, they give you a pie chart chaser. It's like when you go have not that anyone in this room would, but you go have a kingfisher, and then you have an old monk. That's what this is. This is the old monk to the overall chart. Of course, you don't have old monk here in Hyderabad, sorry. So there's a different way. There's a different way to visualize your data. And so I've just pulled out one of these things, and I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, step by step, and tell you about the change. Oftentimes we think about innovation. Let's bring in AI. Let's bring robotic processes. Let's completely change the way we're doing something. My argument here is you can be incredibly innovative by just thinking about how your reader takes on information. So here's a before and after example, and I just want to show you how I got from one to the other one. So the first thing I did, you'll notice on the first example, there are actually 2 different data ranges there on different scales. You've got 2 Y scales, 2 up and down scales, one on the left, one on the right. Whenever you do that, you're asking your reader to compare things that cannot be compared because they're on different scales. It's like comparing squirrels to tractors. You just can't do it. It's not a realistic and not accurate and not a valid comparison. So I pulled it out. And when I pulled it out, I pulled out those bars because you don't want to show time with bars anyway. It's a lot of ink, a lot of distraction from what the pattern is. So right away, I get some clarity with what's going on. The next thing I did was I took out the legend. In the legend, in this particular example, the legend contains no additional information that isn't already on the axes or in the title. So it's not adding any value. But look at the transformation between these two charts. I take out the index, which has no value, but the index takes about 20% of the chart space. One of the big things about data visualization is that we're working with very limited space. So how can we optimize the space that we have? To use something that adds no value, that takes 20%, is a bad situation. But not only that, look at the slopes of the lines between the first one and the second one. When you squeeze something up, the slopes look very dramatic. When you let something relax, they look less so. Another funny thing that happens here, look at the numbers. So there's dates. You can see that someone has repeated 2017 over and over and over. In case you didn't get it, what year you're in after the first 3 months. They did it for all 12. In the first case, it's sideways. In the next one, it's a little bit angular. And so I got that just by deleting the legend. So the next thing I did is I started pulling stuff out. So all of those reference lines, those dark, heavy reference lines, the way the eye to brain connection works is that the thing that is most distinct on the field of vision, so in this case, a dark, heavy line on a white background, this is what the eye is going to pay attention to. And this is what the eye is going to dump onto the brain to try and get the brain figured out. Now, in this case, in the first example on the left, those dark, heavy lines contain no data themselves. And yet, because they're dark and because they're repeated, that is where the eye-brain connection is going to spend most of their time, but there's no data there. So what I've done is I've reduced the number. Now, when you're doing a chart, it's because you want to show a pattern. A table is different, and I'll talk about a table in a minute. A table is for showing discrete values, but a chart is showing a pattern. So when you have all of these horizontal lines, the question is, does it help you understand the pattern? And I would argue it doesn't. Now, the other thing that I've done here is I've changed the date. So instead of repeating it over and over and over, I've just gone with one letter and the year down below. And by the way, this is all within the 100% Excel world. So the thing about text is you should make it comfortable for your reader. Now, in Bengaluru, I study Kannada. So in Kannada, we read from left to right, the same as English. I don't know about Telugu. I don't know about you guys. But we read from left to right. Now, there are some languages that read from right to left. There are some languages that read up and down. But as far as I know, there's no language, and if there was, it would be in this country. There is no language that asks the reader to put their left ear on their left shoulder and go like this. And this is what you're asking your reader to do when you succumb to the default setup that Bill Gates wants you to use. So now what I've done is I've gotten rid of some of the color here and some of the lines that contain no value. So the border around the chart, no value. The border around the bars, no value. And I took away the color, and I took away the little markers. The markers add no value. In fact, they're distracting. Now, color is a very interesting thing. So first of all, for you women, this is a point of power for you, using color. Because 10% of the world's population is colorblind, and the vast majority of them are men. So if you want to get above the men, just start using colors, because they won't know what you're talking about. Now, color can be very, very powerful if you use it in an intuitive way. So typically, we use the traffic signal approach, where green means go, which means good, and red means stop or bad. Now, Hyderabad, of course, you are very civilized. I do not live in Hyderabad, I live in Bengaluru. And so the concept of a traffic signal makes no sense in Bangalore. So, you know, I have to explain to people, you know, down in Maratahali, there's this big light above that crazy intersection down there. That is not a Diwali celebration light. So the last thing I've done is I've told a story with the data. And look at, I've only done 2 things to tell the story. But in the first one, if I were just to present this the way it is, where I name the axis and I put it out there, everyone in this room is going to say, what happened in April? Because you got a big bump there. But I haven't answered the question. There's nothing there. But people, when they see this, are going to say, what happened in April? So in the second thing, first of all, I did a little bit of analysis to understand what happened in April, and I want to know, did this happen last April? So I extended the data to 18 months to see if there could be any seasonality. And I saw, well, indeed, there was. And instead of renaming the axes in the title, I'm telling the reader what the important thing is. So in the last panel, they were talking about, you know, one of the issues is, Josh said, we're not using enough data. And the other panelists said, we're not being very smart about how we're using data. Let me tell you, you don't need a new system. You don't need a new application. You don't need any of those things that you're not buying anyway, apparently. All you need to do is put yourself in your reader's shoes. So in the end, I'm taking you back to the beginning and after, and I'm talking about innovation. So you can see step by step, we did all these little changes with the idea of putting ourselves in our reader's position, trying to understand what are the questions that they're going to ask and answer them before they do, and also making it easier for them to read. This is a table, before and after. So I'll just talk a little bit about the tables right here. So one of the most apparent things that I've done is I've gotten rid of those dark, heavy separator lines. The concept of those dark separating lines is that they're supposed to act like lane lines and hold your eye, even though they're not touching them, but hold your eye in one line so it doesn't jump. But the problem is you cannot control the eye. The eye is constantly moving whether you know it or not. And by putting a line on a sheet of paper doesn't help. But the problem with a line is twofold. One, if you accidentally skip up a row or you drop down a row, you're not going to know it because the pattern's the same. The other problem is just like reference lines, these bars distract the eyes. These bars contain no value, except because of the eye-brain connection, they're going to be focused on those dark, heavy lines. So, as I said, they're supposed to act like lane lines. Thank heavens I'm not in Bengaluru because I have to explain what lane lines are too. So you know those, on that road to the airport, those white lines on the road? Never mind. So what I've done is I've supplemented these light gray shadings across, alternating white and light gray. And what that allows me to do is to give the reader a guide so that their eye can follow along on the row. And if they skip one row, they're going to know it because they're going to have a different background. So they actually have to skip 2 rows in order to make a mistake. The other thing that you'll notice here is that these tables are exactly the same size, but in the first example, they're all abbreviations. And the second one, I've spelled them out. So I think we all here know, in the top one and the first one, we all know what BS is, right? Yeah, Britney Spears, thank you very much. What are you thinking? Oh, watch these guys over here. So you don't know. I mean, the problem with abbreviation is you know what your abbreviation, the person who sits next to you knows what your crazy abbreviation, but your documents have a life of their own. And they're going to end up on somebody's desk sometime who's a lot more senior than you, and they're going to be spending a lot of time trying to figure out what you're talking about. So you should always try to spell it out, even the most simple things. Maybe in this group we could get away with HR, but I think after that it's questionable. The other thing that I've done here would be the last thing I talk about. Well, maybe not. The other thing I've done here is I've gotten rid of insignificant places behind the decimal. So on that top number in the middle, 81.9179, the default function in Excel is if you divide one number by another number, you're going to get a calculation that goes out to 4 places behind the decimal. The problem with that is twofold. One, in terms of how much ink is on the page, we're dedicating 2/3 of the ink to less than 1/10 of the value. So all of those things behind the decimal are worth less than 1/10 of the overall value. The second issue is actually more severe. It's an issue about precision. When you do a number like this, you're essentially lying about your data. You're telling people you have greater precision than you actually do, and I'll give you an example. If I were to go around the room and ask everybody how old they were, which I'm not going to do, but let me just look. I think pretty much everybody in here would be in 2 digits, yeah? So I'm busy writing your age down. I'm putting it in Excel, and then I get the total numbers, and I divide by the total number, and I'm going to get a number like this. Well, not that old. You know, it's probably going to be like 35.8179. But the problem is that you did not give me your age to 4 places behind the decimal. In fact, what you did, well, maybe some of you rounded down a lot, like from 50 to 40. But the rest of you are going to say, yeah, you know, tomorrow's my birthday, but right now I'm 34, and you're going to give me 34. So I end up with a result that is incorrect and misleading. No matter how good an analyst you are, you will never be more accurate than the data you start out with. So don't pretend that you are. So I'm having a lot of emotion right now about tables. One of the most common thing I get, either through LinkedIn or Office, is something that starts like this. Dear Data Whisperer, tables are really boring. Can you suggest something else? I get angry. I love tables. Tables are amazing. You can sort tables from top to bottom. You can sort tables from right to left. You can do what I've done here. You can make numbers stand out. You can make insignificant numbers stand back by coloring them light gray, and they go into the background. If it's a really important number that is big trouble, you can color it red. I mean, what could be more powerful than a table? So when people say to me, tables are boring, I say, you know what? It ain't the table. It's you. So this is the point in the lecture where I really wish you guys had Old Monk here, because I get pretty emotional about this. So this is about pie charts. I don't use pie charts, and I don't think you should. If you use a pie chart, great. Don't send it to me. I don't want to know. But go ahead, knock yourself out. I would like to tell you why I don't use pie charts. So pie charts are an inefficient way for human beings to gauge what the value is. So I just give a little example here. I've got A and I've got B. And can you see it? Yeah. So you can see A is 14 and B is 15. Very easy to see that within the column bar construct. An even easier way for me to do it, and more efficient with ink, would just say 14 and 15. But a pie chart doesn't do that. What a column chart does is it starts in one place, goes in the same direction, so the only comparison you're making is about where the bars end. And I put a little helpful information that you could say, yeah, 15, the other one looks about 14. Done. You have a very good idea of what's going on. So here's the default pie chart. Now I removed the other 2 slices, but I put in 14 and 15. You can barely tell which one is bigger, which one is smaller. And the reason is pie charts are inefficient ways to display data. They start in the same point, they go into disparate directions, and the comparison isn't clear. In a bar chart, we compare where they end. In a pie chart, what do we compare? You can compare the angle, you can compare the arc, you can compare the area. All of those are complex formulas, which our human brains are not set up to calculate. So it becomes very difficult to interpret what a pie chart says. But I know what you're going to say next. You're going to say, Chris, I would never put on a pie chart where the 2 things were so close together. I think you're lying, but let's go with that for a minute. You're going to do Pac-Man. You're going to have A and B. Here's my problem with that. When you look at this chart, what is the most important thing you can say about this chart? Wow, B is bigger than A. How much bigger? I don't know. If you're really excited about it, you could yell, wow, look at how big B is. Or if you're a pessimist, you could say, wow, look at how little A is. A pie chart is a slice of data in a slice of time. It has no context. A pie chart does not help you make a decision. It doesn't tell you what came before. It has no inclination of what's going ahead. It's just there. It's big, it's beautiful, it's round. It belongs on your table, not on your dashboard. So as I said, I think you're lying, because this is how you're going to do a pie chart, because this is why This is most pie charts. And why do we do it this way? We do it because we're lazy. Because all you got to do is just highlight that data and go, boom. Bill, make me a chart. And by the way, this is how Bill Gates wants you to present your data. That man loves pie charts. So I already talked why legends are problematic. Legends contain information about the data that's spatially dislocated from the data. Now, this is the most common type of pie chart. Something big in the middle called other. Oh, okay, that's helpful. And then all these little things. And now you're supposed to go back and forth as the reader to match these up. And just imagine if you're a man, right? On International Women's Day, I gave this, and boy, the women were excited. I could see people writing down notes, colored pie charts. The key to my career. So then someday from now, you remember, oh, I remember that crazy Western living in Bangalore, and he was saying, pie charts are really difficult to figure out the size, so I'll put the label there. Now look at the craziness I've just created. Not to mention with what you can't see, one of the slices here actually has 0 value, but has a name and a label. But let's look at this for a minute. What are we circling around the pie chart? We've got a name, and we've got a value. This is a table. Albeit a crazy table, it's going around in circles. There's no way to sort a pie chart. I mean, it's like King Arthur's round table. Remember that concept? Everyone is equal. That's the problem. You can't sort it, and it's crazy. So you end up with all the values of a table, but this big, huge, crazy piece of chart junk in the middle, distracting women and just confusing men. So this is the same data. It's in a table. It's less space, it's more intuitive. I've sorted by order, and it's easier to read. But I don't need to stop there. Within the same amount of space, I can add other information, like where it was last time. What was the percent change last time? And here I've added a little additional information. So in this case, what state these animals come from. So that's why I don't use pie charts. I do have some scientific evidence. All of this so far is just stuff I've made up, but I have some scientific evidence about why you should not use pie chart. I'd like to share that with you now. My young son just turned 18, but between the ages of 6 and 8, all the way up to about 13 or 14, scary things happen to boys at that age, which we won't talk about here. There's one food that all boys in all cultures will eat across the world for birthday parties, and that's cheese pizza. And so you go to these pizza places, and you take these boys, and of course in the US we have crazy pizza parlors where they have playgrounds. As if boys weren't dirty enough, we have to encourage them to even get more dirty. We bring in these playgrounds, and there's that one special thing. It's like a pool, a swimming pool, but instead of water, it's filled with plastic balls. And they go down there, and they disappear. They're gone for like hours. I don't know what's going on down there. I don't know, and I don't want to know. And they come back up, and it's time to have the pizza. So, we get the extra large pizza, the big round kind. And you've got these boys sitting on the benches on their knees, and they're sweating because they're so dirty. And the wait person comes down and puts this giant pizza in the middle of the table. And you know what? Nothing happens. And why not? Because those boys are sitting there doing the calculation, trying to figure out which is the biggest piece. So they're frozen, and they're not moving. Why? Because it's a pie chart. So then, of course, what's happened, because they're dirty, somebody slips, and then they all panic, and they all just grab in whatever piece. Because the most important thing about a birthday party is bragging rights over who got the biggest piece, and the worst thing is the guy who had to wait for the next pizza in order to eat. So that's why I don't use pie charts, and that's why I don't think you should either. So let's go to the extreme part of a pie chart. So here's a three-dimensional pie chart. Do you notice anything interesting about this pie chart? This is default right out of Bill Gates' hands. Apparently 61 is bigger than 39. This is the new math. One more pie chart. So there's a special place in the world for many things. In my life, it's the incredible and amazing exploding three-dimensional pie chart. If you take a look at that piece, the blue piece, and I asked you how big it was, you'd say, I don't know, 25, 30, something like that. And then if I asked you to take a look at the hole that's in the red piece, you'd say, yeah, I don't know, 15, 20. But here's the question. Can you fit that blue piece back into the pie it came from? As we say in Bangalore, illa, sir. So there is another way. So there are data-dense ways that you can show a lot of data and you can show it intuitively. And all of this you can do in Excel, since you all have it anyway, apparently. In the first example, this is what I call flying snakes. It's very easy to create. You select all the data and you go, boom, here it is. And the reader is left looking at that, and there's no idea what's going on here. You know, apparently you've got that yellow line which goes up really high and then goes down so low that it goes below zero and then it surfaces up magically a little while later. Not to mention, this is a very good illustration of why I don't think you should use a legend. Just going back and forth, and yet I'm pretty sure that all of you are looking at something like this on a regular basis. This is incomprehensible. I call this a one-week chart. And what I mean by a one-week chart is if I go to the creator of the chart 1 week later and ask them to explain it to me, they cannot. So how could I, as a reader in a dashboard, understand what's going on? So what I've done is a little bit different in the same amount of space, which is I've created for each data element, I've created its own space. And what I've done is I've frozen the axes so that I can compare all of the shifts together. I've written the text large enough so that the reader can read it. Their eye doesn't have to go bouncing back and forth to do it. And I've picked one paradigm. In this case, it's a area chart. And I've just repeated it over and over. And I could start asking you questions about what's going on here. I could ask you what's seasonal. I could ask you what's in trouble. I could ask you if these were products and you were under a product manager, which one of these things would you want to manage as a product manager? And you would have cogent answers to that. And I haven't even told you what the data represents. So this is called small multiples. It was developed by Edward Tufte, E.T. And it is one of the most intuitive ways to get your reader to the same level of intimacy with data that you are. It's a very powerful way and fits very nicely on a dashboard. The next one I want to talk about, since I was talking about glucose before, in the first table there, those are handwritten notes of a daily glucose measure. So this is how we do it in the hospital when someone's in there with a blood sugar problem. 3 times a day, we're writing these down. I've taken all of that data and put it into a single line. So even though it's a very small line, one can see what the ups and downs are. One can see what the patterns are. So this is called a Sparkline, and it's also a very powerful way to represent your data. And what's nice about small multiples and Sparklines is that they fit very nicely on a dashboard and gives the reader a lot of context to understand, yes, this is where it is today. In this case, I've shown you, I don't think you can quite see it, but there's a normal bound as well. And I put a red for the person didn't exercise that day, or do I put a red for a person who did not follow their diet that day, and a green for when they exercise. So even the Sparkline itself, you can add additional information to make it come more alive. There are really only 3 things to graphic excellence, and none of them require you to buy a new tool. The first one is to tell your story. Bill Gates' time is over. He's done what he's done. He's now doing some more interesting things around malaria, thank heavens. Thank heavens he's out of the data visualization space. Don't let Bill Gates, don't let SAP, don't let Oracle, don't let any of these people tell you how to present your data. Come up with your story and tell your story. The second point is spend ink wisely. I always use the verb to spend when I talk about ink because there is a cost. The cost of ink is your reader's attention. Your reader must pay attention to everything that you put out there. If that thing is not helping you tell your story, pull it out. And spend ink, as I did in the first example, where I told the reader what the story was, high attrition after bonus payout, spend ink in order to get that return on your value, which is your reader's understanding of the graphic. The third one is use a font that's easy to read. So I gave the example of the sideways font, but there's also a thing about the size of font as well. So in those examples that I gave you, the bad examples, they were squeezing everything down. And it was hard to see on the screen, but it's just as hard to see on a small screen as well because the font is so small. You actually have to expand it in order to see what the font is. Don't use sideways font, and use a font size that is at least 10. And the reason is because the smaller the font is, the more difficult people find it to read, particularly people in their 40s and 50s. Not me, clearly, but people I know, and they have to put glasses on in order to read it. Don't put people in that uncomfortable situation. So if you follow those 3 steps, those 3 simple steps, I guarantee you, you will never create a graphic the same way again. Here's what you can correct or create. Very intuitive, lots of white space, plenty of opportunity for your reader to explore what the story is. This is from Stephen Few. Here's another one. The other one was HR, this is not, but the same kind of deal. You can come up with graphic examples that are not only beautiful, but compelling in order to tell your story. And here's one I created for you today, a talent acquisition dashboard. There's a lot of information on here. You can read every line. Everything is intuitive. And I've used small multiples down at the bottom to give an overall story. And all I've done is those 3 things. So I would suggest to you, you don't need to wait for a big implementation. This is something, since you all have Excel, this is something that you can take home and change tonight what you're doing tomorrow. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.